68 years on this earth, and the closest I ever came to becoming a violent man was not in a bar, not on a job site, not in my 20s when I was dumb enough to think pride counted as strength. It was in my own son's living room in Anchorage, Alaska, on a hard November evening with black ice beginning to silver the roads and a cup of coffee cooling untouched beside my hand. My name is Ron Smith, retired carpenter, widower, third-generation Alaskan. Born and raised in Anchorage, back when parts of this city still felt half-built and half-wild, the edges rough, the winters mean, and the people practical, because the cold punished softness. I came up in Spenard when it still had the kind of reputation that made mothers lock doors early and fathers keep one eye on the window after dark. I worked with my hands for 40 years. Decks, stairs, cabinets, roof frames, structural repairs, kitchen remodels, custom furniture, if somebody had the money and the patience to let the work be done right. I've got hands like catcher's mitts and a left knee that never healed properly after a roofing slip in '94. My late wife Gloria used to say I had the face of a man, permanently disappointed with the world, even when the world had actually behaved itself for once. She said it with affection. She also said, more than once, that if patience could be sawed, planned, glued, and clamped, I'd have built an empire out of it. She wasn't wrong. A man in my line of work learns a few things, if he's any good. He learns that the important parts of a structure are often the parts nobody ever sees. He learns that a pretty finish can hide bad framing for only so long. He learns where stress gathers. He learns which joints fail under pressure and which ones get stronger because of it. He learns that rushing is just a more expensive way of doing something twice. He learns that quiet is not the same thing as weak. What I did not know until that night was that a father could look at his own newborn daughter and describe her as if she were a defect in inventory. That was the part I was not built for. That was the part that split the old lumber inside me. By the time this story ends, my son Henry Smith is 41 years old, professionally polished, financially comfortable, and very good at giving people the impression that competence and decency are the same thing. They are not. Some men wear confidence the way other men wear a tailored coat. It fits them beautifully from a distance. Up close, you start noticing the seams pulling. But on that night, I didn't yet understand how far gone he was. I knew Henry was ambitious. I knew he liked order, appearances, outcomes, and the kind of social polish that makes people in offices mistake emotional coldness for leadership. I knew he preferred solutions to complications and disliked anything that could not be optimized, managed, improved, or quietly removed from view. But there are flaws in a man you think you understand, and then there are cavities running through the beam that only reveal themselves once the whole weight of life comes down on them. That night, the weight came down. He had called that afternoon and asked me to come over. There was something in his voice I didn't like. Too measured, too formal. Men don't call their fathers in that tone, unless they are about to inform rather than consult. He and Jennifer were living up in the hillside part of Anchorage then, where the lots are bigger and the houses sit back from the road like they know they're worth something. Decorative porches, 2-car garages, tasteful stone in front. The sort of neighborhood where everything looks orderly from the outside, and everyone is committed to maintaining the illusion that order means goodness. The baby had been born 3 days earlier at Providence, Alaska Medical Center. 3 weeks early, but healthy in every visible way a grandfather could see from the wrong side of nursery glass. I'd already gone to the hospital every day, standing there like a fool in love, pressing too close to the window, smiling at a child who couldn't possibly know my face, and had already rearranged my soul anyway. I had held her once, exactly once, for 1 blessed hour. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, tiny, warm, brand new. She had wrapped her whole hand around my finger, and that was that. There are moments in life where love arrives with no debate, no preparation, no permission. It does not ask whether you are ready. It simply enters the room and takes its place. That child did that to me. So, when Henry asked me to come by that evening, I assumed we were going to talk about doctors, schedules, nerves, the ordinary fear of new parents standing at the edge of a life they had not yet learned how to carry. I drove there in the blue dark with the headlights stretching long across the road and the mountains swallowed by cloud. Anchorage in November has a particular kind of silence to it. Not peaceful, just waiting. The city feels like it's holding its breath before winter commits itself. Jennifer opened the door. She had that look people get after too much crying and too little sleep. Eyes swollen, mouth tense, hair done in that rushed way where a woman hopes neatness will disguise collapse. She tried to smile when she saw me. It lasted maybe half a second before it broke. That was the first sign. I kissed her cheek, stepped inside, unbuttoned my coat, and smelled coffee and expensive candles, and the faint, sterile scent of a house where nobody had lived normally in several days. Henry was already in the living room, standing instead of sitting. That was the second sign. People sit when they want conversation. They stand when they have already made a decision and are preparing to survive your reaction to it. There are things you notice when you've spent your life reading materials. Grain direction, hairline cracks, movement under pressure. Human beings are no different if you pay attention long enough. Jennifer stood near the edge of the room, with her arms folded too tightly across herself. Henry had squared his shoulders, jaw set, face carefully composed. Not grief-stricken, not confused, resolved. I remember the coffee cup Jennifer handed me. Pale ceramic, too hot to drink right away. I remember setting it down on an end table beside a stack of design magazines. I remember thinking her hands were shaking. I remember thinking Henry looked like a man about to explain a business decision. "Dad," he said, "we need to tell you something about the baby." 3 days old. That sentence should never have had that tone. I looked from him to Jennifer and back again. "What about her?" Jennifer looked at the floor. Henry looked at me, and the room changed. I don't know how else to describe it. Same walls, same lamplight, same polished floor, same decorative nonsense on the shelves. But the atmosphere shifted so completely, it felt like pressure dropping before a storm. A man knows when he is standing on the threshold of something he will remember in ugly detail for the rest of his life. His body knows before his mind does. "She's deaf," Henry said, profoundly. "Both ears. The doctors confirmed it this morning." He paused there, and in that pause was the entire future trying to decide what kind of people we were. I remember that I didn't panic. Not at first. I thought, deaf. All right. Harder, yes. Different, yes. But not catastrophe. Not ruin. Not death. A problem to learn around. A language to acquire. A world to understand. A child to love in the way she required. Not the life they expected, maybe. But life rarely bothers asking what you expected before handing you what is yours. Then Henry kept talking. And we've made a decision. There are sentences that arrive already carrying blood in their teeth. He said the adoption was already in motion. Private, closed, arranged, practical, necessary. Best for everyone. Best for the child. Best for their family. Best given the circumstances. Best because they were not equipped. Best because they lacked the resources, the expertise, the infrastructure, the whatever else men like Henry say when they want language to do the work of conscience. I do not remember the exact order of all his words after that. I remember only the impact, because somewhere in the middle of his explanation, with Jennifer silent and white-faced and folded in on herself, my son used a word about his own daughter that turned something inside my chest into fire. Damaged, that was the word. Not sick, not struggling, not vulnerable, not unexpected. Damaged, as though she were a shipment that had arrived cracked, as though the problem was not his ignorance, but her existence, as though 3 days after entering the world, she had already failed inspection. It is one thing to be angry. Anger is hot and simple. It rises, it breaks, it burns itself out if you give it room. This was not simple anger. This was something colder, deeper, more dangerous because it arrived with clarity. I looked at my son and understood, with a level of stillness that frightened me, that if I stayed seated much longer, I might throw that cup through his picture window and drag half his carefully arranged life out into the snow. I heard myself say very quietly, "What did you just call her?" Henry did that thing he had done since adolescence, whenever he wanted to stand against judgment. He straightened his spine, flattened his face, and became calm in the way certain men become calm when they have decided your feelings are an inefficiency. "Dad, don't start. You're not hearing this rationally. Not hearing this rationally. There is a line men cross sometimes without realizing it. And once they cross it, they become strangers even to their own blood. She is 6 pounds and 2 ounces, I said. She has your grandmother's eyes. Jennifer made a broken sound somewhere behind me. Henry kept going. He said they couldn't do this. He said they were not prepared for that kind of child. He said they didn't know sign language. He said they had to think about the future. Their future, the effect on the family, the burden, the limitations, the realities. He wrapped selfishness in vocabulary and expected me to admire the packaging. I remember thinking with absolute certainty, I do not know this man, because I had once known a boy with scraped knees and stubborn hair and a grin missing one front tooth, a boy I taught to sand with the grain, a boy who used to fall asleep in the truck coming back from hardware runs, a boy whose mother kissed his forehead every night and who cried when a stray dog got hit by a plow one winter. Somewhere between that child and the man in front of me, something had gone wrong in the framing, and here was the proof. I looked at Jennifer then. She was crying silently, hands clasped so hard her knuckles had gone pale. She would not meet my eyes. That too I remembered, not because it excused her, because it didn't. There is a kind of cowardice that acts by force, and another kind that acts by surrender. The second one leaves fewer marks on the furniture, but the damage is real all the same. I stood up. My knee ached the way it always did in the cold. My coffee sat there untouched between us. I picked it up for 1 second, not to drink, but because my hands needed something to do besides make a fist. Then I set it down again, carefully. That detail matters to me, because losing control would have made the night about my temper. Control made it about their choice. I put on my coat, buttoned it all the way up, reached for the door. "Dad," Henry said, annoyed now, not ashamed. "Don't be dramatic." I turned and looked at him. Really looked, measured him the way I had spent a lifetime measuring compromised wood, not for beauty, but for truth. And what I saw was not a man trapped by fear or confusion. I saw a man who had decided that love was conditional on convenience and expected the world to respect him for efficiency. Then I left. I did not slam the door. That would have implied disorder. I closed it cleanly, firmly, final. Outside, the cold hit like a verdict. I walked to my truck, breath white in the dark, hands shaking once before they steadied. The road home to Raspberry Road was slick in places. Anchorage was all shadows and amber streetlights, and low cloud pressing down over invisible mountains. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the heater too low because I couldn't feel temperature properly anymore. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember fragments, a stoplight reflecting red on black ice, a plough ridge at the curb, the hollow beat in my ribs, the thought repeating itself with brutal simplicity. Find her, not argue, not negotiate, not persuade. Find her. When I got home, I did what I always did when the world stopped making sense in ordinary language. I went to the workshop. The workshop sat behind the house, warm with the scent of pine dust, oil, varnish, old labor, and every version of myself I had ever left behind in unfinished projects. Some men pray in churches, some in hospitals, some not at all. I have always understood wood better than theology. But if there is such a thing as sacred ground for a man like me, it was there under that yellow work light with tools hung in order and the bench scarred by 40 years of trying to make useful things in a difficult world. I stood there for a long time with my coat still on. Then I took it off. Then I pulled a piece of hardwood from the rack and began to work. A rocking horse? I did not think about it. My hands chose before my mind caught up. I cut, measured, sanded, fitted, shaped the curve of the runners, the head, the neck, the seat. The sound of the saw settled me. The rasping of the plane steadied my breathing. Every pass of the blade took the roar in my chest and gave it somewhere to go. There are nights when grief comes at you like weather. There are other nights when grief arrives disguised as purpose. That was one of those nights. I worked until nearly 3 in the morning, building a small wooden horse for a child who had already been taken out of reach. No, that's not right. Not taken out of reach. Hidden. There is a difference. And sometime between midnight and dawn, with shavings piling around my boots and the radio off, and the whole house quiet around me, a decision took final shape. Not dramatic, not shouted, not sworn toward heaven. Just placed inside me with the same certainty as a well-cut joint settling where it belongs. I was going to find that little girl. I did not know how. I did not know where. I did not know it would take 9 years, cost me money, time, sleep, pride, and whatever was left of my relationship with my son. I did not know that the trail would run through community college classrooms, closed adoption registries, deaf community gatherings, hospital grief, school workshops, and one photograph shown by a teenage boy with bad manners and a good heart. I knew only this. Some things, once said, separate the world into before and after. That night Henry said damaged, and I decided that one day, whether he deserved it or not, he was going to live long enough to see exactly what he had thrown away. Before everything broke, before words were said that could not be taken back, before a child was quietly removed from her own bloodline like something inconvenient that needed to be handled out of sight, there was a family that, on the surface, looked like it held together just fine. That's the part people always miss. Nothing ever looks like it's about to collapse until the beam gives way. Henry was my only son. 41 years old by the time this story reaches its end. But long before that, he had already become the kind of man who moved through the world with purpose, efficiency, and a certain sharp-edged confidence that made other people trust him faster than they should have. He worked as a regional manager for a commercial real estate firm downtown, office on Fifth Avenue, glass walls, polished shoes, the kind of place where deals are discussed in low voices and decisions get made over lunches that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He wore his ambition well. Always had. People liked him. That was the problem, because liking a man is not the same thing as knowing him. Henry had inherited certain things from me. Discipline, a work ethic that didn't quit when things got difficult, a refusal to leave a job half-finished. But somewhere along the way, he'd also developed something I couldn't trace back to either side of the family. A kind of emotional detachment, not cruelty in the obvious sense, not shouting, not violence, not anything that leaves marks you can photograph, something quieter, colder. His mother, Gloria, used to say he came into the world already calculating. She meant it as a joke when he was younger, said it with a smile when he figured out how to trade his Halloween candy for better pieces, or how to convince his teachers he deserved extra time on assignments he hadn't bothered to start early. He was clever, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Back then it was charming. Later it wasn't, because there's a line between thinking ahead and thinking only of yourself. And Henry crossed it so gradually, none of us marked the exact moment. Jennifer came into his life when he was in his early 30s. Quiet woman, careful in the way she spoke, as if every sentence had to pass through a filter before it was allowed into the air. Thin, pale, with a habit of folding her hands together when she was nervous, which was often. The kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her in the grocery store. She was not a weak person, but she was not a confrontational one either, and that matters more than people think. Because when you build a life with someone like Henry, you either learn to stand against him when it counts, or you learn to bend. Jennifer bent, not all at once, not dramatically, just a little, here and there, decision by decision, until one day she found herself standing in a living room, watching her husband explain why their daughter was not something they could keep. And she said nothing, but that came later. At the beginning, she loved him. I believe that. I believe she saw the parts of Henry that were easy to admire. The competence, the drive, the ability to make things happen. And I believe, like many people do, that she assumed the rest would follow, that kindness would catch up, that empathy would fill in where logic ran thin. That's a dangerous assumption, because people do not grow into qualities they do not value, and Henry did not value complication. Cynthia came into the world on a Thursday morning at Providence, Alaska Medical Center. Early, but strong, 3 weeks ahead of schedule, which worried Jennifer more than Henry. I remember that clearly. Henry asked questions about timelines, recovery, logistics. Jennifer asked if the baby would be all right. There's a difference in those questions. 6 pounds, 2 ounces. I've said that before, but it matters, because numbers are facts, and facts have weight. She had Gloria's eyes. That was the first thing I noticed when they placed her in my arms. Wide, dark, alert in a way newborns sometimes are, when they haven't yet learned the rhythm of sleep and waking. And her chin, God help me, her chin was my grandmother's. Stubborn line to it. You could see it even then if you knew what you were looking for. Some traits don't wait to develop. They arrive fully formed. I held her for 1 hour. Exactly 1. That's all I got before the world shifted. She smelled like something untouched by anything wrong. That's the best way I can put it. Like new wood before it's cut. Like snow before the first set of footprints. There is a purity to the beginning of things that you can feel if you pay attention. She wrapped her hand around my finger and held on. That grip. It wasn't strong, not physically, but there was intention in it. Reflex, maybe. Biology. But it didn't feel like that to me. It felt like connection, like something choosing to anchor itself, even briefly, in a world it had just entered. I remember thinking, right there in that hospital room, that whatever came next, I would be part of it. I did not yet know what next meant. The doctors identified the hearing loss within 48 hours. Routine testing, follow-ups, quiet conversations in hospital hallways, medical language that tries very hard to be neutral and often ends up sounding colder than it intends. Profound bilateral hearing loss, both ears. Not partial, not something that might improve. Permanent. I wasn't there when Henry and Jennifer first heard the diagnosis. That matters too, because I've replayed that moment in my head more times than I care to admit. Tried to imagine the exact second when expectation broke and reality took its place. Tried to understand what they felt. Fear, certainly. Confusion. The sudden awareness that the future they had pictured had just been replaced with one they didn't understand. Those reactions are human. What came after? That was choice. When Henry called me that afternoon, asking me to come over, the decision had already been made. Papers moving, arrangements underway, a closed adoption, clean, final. No complications, no lingering connections. He had solved the problem. That's how he saw it. I didn't know that yet when I drove up to his house. I didn't know that the child I had held that morning, the one whose hand had wrapped around my finger like it meant something, had already been categorized, assessed, and quietly removed from the structure of our family before she had even spent a full week in the world. There are things you expect from life. You expect hardship, loss, illness, mistakes. You expect that not everything will go according to plan. What you do not expect, what you are never prepared for, is discovering that the people you trust most will redefine love in a way that excludes someone who needs it most. That's not hardship. That's fracture. And fractures don't stay contained. They spread. I blamed Henry first. Of course I did. He was the one who said the word. He was the one who framed the decision. He was the one who stood there with that calm, controlled tone and told me there was nothing I could do. But over the years, and this is something I didn't understand right away, I came to see Jennifer differently too, because silence has consequences. It took me 9 years to fully grasp that. 9 years, and an envelope that never reached me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, in those first days, I kept replaying the hospital visit in my mind, the weight of Cynthia in my arms, the way her fingers curled, the way she turned her head slightly, as if trying to orient herself in a world she could not hear. People think deafness is silence. It isn't. It's a different way of experiencing sound. That's something I would learn later. Back then, all I knew was that she was alive, present, aware in her own way, and entirely dependent on the people around her to decide whether that life would be embraced or abandoned. Henry made his decision. Jennifer followed it, and I walked out of that house into the cold with something inside me already shifting into place. Not anger anymore. Not exactly. Something steadier. Something that would last longer. A structure forming. Because if there's one thing I understand better than most, it's this. When something is built wrong from the beginning, you don't stand around hoping it fixes itself. You tear it down. Or you build something else. Somewhere else, with better materials and stronger hands. That night, I didn't yet know what that something else would look like. I only knew that a child existed who had been dismissed before she had even had the chance to be known. And I knew, with the same certainty I've trusted my entire working life, that I was not the kind of man who would let that stand. There are moments in a man's life that divide everything into before and after. Not gradually, not with warning, just a clean break, like a beam snapping under weight it was never meant to carry. That night in Henry's living room was one of those moments. I've replayed it more times than I can count. Not because I enjoy it, not because I think I'll find something new in it, but because the mind has a habit of returning to the place where everything changed, as if repetition might somehow reshape the outcome. It never does. But you look anyway. Henry stood there, squared shoulders, controlled expression, already committed to the version of reality he had chosen. Jennifer stood off to the side, hands clasped, eyes down, like she was trying to disappear without actually leaving the room, and I stood between them, holding the weight of something I hadn't yet fully understood. "She's deaf," Henry had said. That part I could accept. Not easily, maybe, but accept. Life doesn't consult you before it changes direction. But then came the rest. The decision, already made, already in motion, already beyond discussion. That was the part that didn't sit right. And then, that word, damaged. It didn't echo in the room. It landed, heavy, final, like a nail driven too deep into wood that didn't deserve it. I remember the silence that followed. Not empty silence. No. This was the kind that fills every corner of a space, pressing in on your ears, stretching time just enough that you become aware of your own breathing. What did you just call her? I asked. My voice didn't rise, didn't need to. Henry exhaled slowly, like I was the one complicating things. Like I was introducing emotion into a situation that required efficiency. Dad, he said, you're reacting instead of thinking. That was always his way. Frame emotion as weakness, frame logic as superiority. But there is a difference between thinking clearly and thinking coldly. And Henry had crossed that line without realizing it. She's 3 days old, I said. Jennifer made a sound. Small, broken. Then covered her mouth like she wished she could pull it back inside herself. Henry didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me. We have to be realistic, he said. This isn't just about now. It's about the rest of our lives. The cost, the care, the limitations. We're not equipped for this. Not equipped? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. You're not equipped, I said slowly, to raise your own child? It's not that simple. It is that simple. No, it's not, he snapped, just a flicker of irritation breaking through his calm. You don't understand what this means. This isn't just a challenge, Dad. This is permanent. This affects everything. Yes, I said, it does. And for a second, just one, I thought maybe we were about to meet in the middle. That maybe he would hear himself. That maybe the weight of what he was saying would settle into him and shift something. It didn't. We can't raise a damaged child, he said again, more firmly this time, like repetition would turn it into truth. That's when something inside me went very, very still. Not anger, not yet, something colder, more precise. Like the moment before you make a cut, you know, can't be undone. She wrapped her hand around my finger, I said. Henry frowned, confused, like I had introduced irrelevant information into a business discussion. What? This morning, I said. At the hospital. She wrapped her whole hand around my finger. Silence. Jennifer's shoulders started shaking. Henry's jaw tightened. That doesn't change anything, he said. That was the moment, not when he said damaged, not when he explained the adoption. This moment, when he chose to dismiss something human, something real, because it didn't fit into the equation he had already decided on. That was when I understood. This wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't even selfishness in the ordinary sense. It was belief. He truly believed he was right. And that made it worse. You've already arranged it, I said. Yes. Without talking to me. It's not your decision. No, I said. It's not. That was the last calm thing I said, because what came next wasn't loud, but it carried everything. You looked at your daughter, I said, your own blood, and decided she wasn't worth the work. Henry's eyes hardened. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said. I said we're not equipped. You said damaged. The word hung there again, ugly, unavoidable. Jennifer let out a quiet sob. Henry ran a hand through his hair, irritation now fully visible. Dad, you're twisting this. This isn't about emotion. This is about reality. No, I said. This is about you deciding what kind of man you are. That hit. I saw it land. But instead of reconsidering, he doubled down. I'm deciding what kind of life my family is going to have. Your family, not her, not the child 3 days into existence. Your family, and just like that, she was already outside it. I picked up my coffee cup. For a second, I really did consider throwing it. Not at him, at the wall, at the window, at anything that would break loudly enough to match what had just been done quietly. But I didn't, because destruction is easy. Control is harder, and I have always believed that the harder thing is usually the right one. So instead, I set the cup back down, carefully, exactly where it had been. That detail mattered, because it meant I was choosing what happened next, not reacting to it. I stood up. My knee protested like it always did in the cold, but I barely noticed. Jennifer looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were red, desperate, searching for something. Permission, maybe, or absolution, or someone else to take responsibility for what she hadn't stopped. I didn't give her any of those things. Not then, maybe not ever, because there are moments where silence is not confusion. It's agreement, and she had chosen hers. I put on my coat, buttoned it slowly, not because I needed time, because I wanted them to see it, to understand that this wasn't a reaction. This was a decision. "Dad," Henry said, exasperated now. "Don't do this." "Don't do what?" "Walk out like this. You're being dramatic." I looked at him, and in that moment, I wasn't looking at my son. Not really. I was looking at a man I didn't recognize, trying, one last time, to find the boy I used to know somewhere behind his eyes. I couldn't. "You've already done it," I said. "What?" I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and immediate. "You just don't understand it yet." And then I stepped outside. I didn't slam the door. I closed it. Clean. Final. The kind of close that says something is over, even if the consequences haven't caught up yet. The cold hit my face like a wake-up call. Anchorage at night in November doesn't ease you into anything. It reminds you immediately that the world does not care about your comfort. That if you're going to survive, you adapt. I walked to my truck, each step deliberate, each breath visible in the dark. Behind me, inside that house, was the life Henry had chosen. Ahead of me was something else. I didn't know what yet, only that it would not include accepting what had just happened. I got into the truck, sat there for a moment. Hands on the wheel, engine off! And for the first time since I had left that room, I let myself feel it. Not just anger, not just disappointment, something deeper. Grief, because in that one conversation, I hadn't just lost access to my granddaughter. I had lost my son, not physically. He was still there, still talking, still breathing, still convinced he had done the right thing. But the version of him I thought I had raised, that version was gone, and in its place was a man I could not follow. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark, and as I pulled away from that house, one thought settled into place with the kind of certainty that doesn't fade. I was going to find her, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. And when I did, I was going to make sure that somewhere in this world there existed a life where she was never, ever described by that word again. Damaged, not while I was still breathing. I started the engine, but for a long moment, I didn't move. The headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, illuminating nothing but cold air and the faint shimmer of ice forming across the road. Behind me, Henry's house sat quiet and composed, like nothing inside it had. That was the part that stayed with me. How normal everything still looked. How controlled, as if a decision like that could be made, and the world would simply continue without noticing. I put the truck into gear and drove. Anchorage at night in November. doesn't offer comfort. It offers clarity. The roads were slick in places, the kind of slick you don't see until your tires remind you. The streetlights stretched long across the asphalt, orange and thin, disappearing into low clouds that hid the mountains completely. I drove slower than usual, not because of the ice, because something inside me had shifted, and I wasn't ready to outrun it yet. There was no yelling, replaying in my head, no arguments, no imagined comebacks, just that word, damaged. It didn't echo. It settled, and the more it settled, the clearer everything else became. By the time I turned onto Raspberry Road, I already understood something that would shape the next 9 years of my life. I was not going to change Henry, and I was not going to stop. Those two things arrived together. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat there in the sudden silence. The ticking of cooling metal filled the cab, sharp in the cold air. My breath fogged the windshield for a second before fading. Stillness, complete. For a moment I considered going inside, sitting down, trying to sleep, pretending this was something that would resolve itself in the morning. But I've spent too many years building things to believe in that kind of thinking. Structures don't fix themselves overnight. If something is wrong at the foundation, you don't wait. You act. So I opened the door and stepped out into the cold. It hit hard, clean, immediate. The kind of cold that doesn't ask if you're ready for it. It just arrives and expects you to adjust. I didn't go toward the house. I went past it, straight to the workshop. The light flickered once when I switched it on, casting that familiar warm glow across the space. Same tools, same bench, same unfinished pieces exactly where I'd left them. The smell of sawdust and oil settled around me like something steady, like a part of my life that hadn't shifted out from under me. That mattered more than I expected, because everything else had just changed. I closed the door behind me, took off my coat, hung it on the hook, rolled up my sleeves, and stood there for a second, hands resting on the edge of the bench. There's a moment after something breaks where your mind tries to catch up to your body, where you're aware that something is wrong, but the shape of that wrongness hasn't fully formed yet. That moment passed, and then my hands started moving. No plan, no decision, just motion. I reached for a piece of hardwood from the rack, ran my palm along the grain. Solid, good material, the kind that holds shape if you treat it right. I set it down on the bench, picked up a pencil, and began to mark. A curve, then another, slow, measured. By the time I realized what I was drawing, it was already there. A rocking horse. I stopped, just for a second, looked down at it. A small, almost bitter smile touched the edge of my mouth before disappearing. Of course it was. Out of everything I could have made in that moment, that's what came out. Something for a child, something meant to carry weight gently, something built for balance. I could have walked away then, left it unfinished. But unfinished things have a way of sitting in your life like questions, and I didn't have room for questions anymore. So I picked up the saw. The first cut settled something inside me. Clean, controlled. The blade moved through the wood with that familiar resistance, that quiet agreement between tool and material that only comes with experience. Measure. Cut. Adjust. Repeat. The rhythm came back immediately, and with it, silence. Not the kind that fills your ears. The kind that replaces noise. The anger didn't disappear, but it changed. It stopped being sharp, stopped being chaotic. It became focused. Directed. Useful. I worked without checking the time. The outside world narrowed until it barely existed. There was only the pool of light above the bench, the steady motion of my hands, and the shape of something slowly coming into existence, piece by piece. Runners first. They had to be right. Too steep, and the whole thing would tip. Too flat, and it wouldn't move. Balance is everything in a structure like that. I shaped them carefully, smoothing the curve until it felt right under my hand. Then the body, then the neck, then the head. Each piece cut, sanded, fitted into place with the kind of precision that leaves no room for distraction. Because distraction leads to mistakes, and mistakes in moments like that cost more than material. Sometime deep into the night, I realized I was talking, not loudly, just enough to break the silence. "Gloria," I said. Her name felt different in the workshop. Closer, like she might actually be standing somewhere just out of sight, watching the way she used to when I worked late. "She's out there," I said quietly. The words hung in the air. No answer. But I kept going anyway. "I don't know where," I said, "but she's out there." I picked up the plane, ran it along the edge of the wood. A thin curl lifted, fell to the floor. "I'm going to find her." That was the first time I said it out loud, not as a thought, not as a reaction, as a decision. And once it was said, that was it. There are things you can take back. That wasn't one of them. The night stretched on. The workshop warmed slightly from the effort, the cold retreating just enough to make the air bearable. Shavings gathered at my feet. The shape of the rocking horse became clearer, more defined, more real with every hour that passed. By the time the first hint of morning touched the window, it stood on the bench, not finished, but whole, recognizable, waiting. I set the tools down, stepped back, looked at it, a small thing, simple, built for a child who didn't know it existed. Yet, I wiped my hands slowly, the motion automatic after decades of doing the same thing at the end of a job. Then I walked to the door, opened it. Cold air rushed in again, sharper now, carrying the pale light of early morning. Nothing outside had changed. Same road, same sky, same quiet. But inside, something had locked into place. This wasn't anger anymore. Anger burns out. This was something else, something built, something that could last. I looked back at the rocking horse one last time. Then I said it again. Quiet, certain, find her. Not a hope, not a question, a plan. And then I stepped out into the morning, and the search began. The search didn't begin with a name. It didn't begin with a lead or a phone call or a clue that pointed in any clear direction. It began with a realization, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't arrive all at once. But once it's there, you can't ignore it. A few days after that night in the workshop, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a page filled with nothing useful. Names of agencies, phone numbers, half answers, voicemail recordings that led nowhere. Closed adoption. That phrase came up again and again. Closed meant sealed. Sealed meant no records. No records meant no trail. And no trail meant I had no idea where to start. That should have stopped me. It didn't. But it did force me to slow down, because I've spent my whole life fixing things. And one thing I've learned the hard way is this. When you don't understand the structure, you don't start cutting. You step back. You study. You figure out what holds the whole thing together before you touch anything. So I stopped chasing, and I started thinking. If I couldn't find her yet, Then I needed to be ready for the moment I did. That's when it hit me. Clear, simple, unavoidable. If I stood in front of her tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to talk to her. That thought settled in deeper than anything else had. Because everything I had done up to that point, every note, every phone call, every restless night, none of it mattered if, in the end, I reached her and had nothing she could understand. That wasn't acceptable. Not for me, not for her. So I found a class. Anchorage Community and Technical College. Evening sessions. American Sign Language. Monday and Wednesday nights. $32 a credit hour. I signed up the same day. No hesitation. No overthinking. Because some decisions don't need to be debated. They just need to be made. The first night I walked into that classroom, I didn't belong there. That much was obvious. 19-year-olds with notebooks and curiosity. A couple of younger adults looking for something new to try. Light conversation. Casual energy. And then there was me. Work boots. Calloused hands. Sitting in the back like I was waiting for something serious to begin. They were there to learn a language. I was there for a person. That difference mattered, even if no one else could see it. The instructor was a deaf woman named Patricia. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that doesn't ask for attention. It simply expects to be understood. An interpreter stood beside her for the first few classes, helping bridge the gap while we learned the basics. Patricia scanned the room slowly when she entered, taking everyone in. When her eyes reached me, she paused, just briefly, but long enough. I knew that look. It wasn't doubt exactly. It was evaluation, like she was asking herself a simple question. Why is he here? I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. Time would. The first few weeks were harder than I expected. Not because the material was complicated, but because it required a different kind of control. Sign language isn't just learning words. It's learning how your hands think. Every movement has shape. Every shape has meaning. Every expression changes the sentence. There's no room for approximation. You're either clear or you're not understood. My hands weren't used to that. They were built for pressure, for grip, for holding tools steady against resistance, not for precision in motion. The first time I tried to sign a full sentence, it came out stiff and uneven, like forcing something delicate through fingers that didn't yet know how to listen. The other students laughed when they made mistakes. I didn't, because for them it didn't matter. For me, every mistake felt like distance from her. So I practiced, not casually, not when I felt like it, constantly. In the workshop, I practiced while I worked, one hand sanding, the other repeating signs slowly until they started to feel natural. At the grocery store, I traced movements lightly against my leg while waiting in line, committing shapes to memory. In the truck, stopped at lights, I ran through phrases in my head, translating thoughts into motion, correcting myself before the light turned green. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. And steady, over time, becomes something else, Patricia noticed. Of course she did. By the third week, she stopped watching me like I was out of place and started watching me like I was a problem she hadn't expected to solve. Not a bad problem, just unexpected. I stayed after class often, asked questions, not simple ones, detailed ones. Why does this sign shift depending on context? Why is the movement sharper here? What changes when expression changes? The interpreter worked hard to keep up. Patricia answered everything, directly, clearly, without simplifying it, just because I was new. That told me something. She wasn't adjusting the standard. She was expecting me to meet it, so I did. By the end of the first year, I could hold a conversation. Basic, slow, but real. Enough to introduce myself, enough to understand responses, enough to begin. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. So I kept going. Year 2 changed things. The stiffness disappeared. My hands stopped hesitating. Movements became smoother, more natural, less mechanical. I stopped translating in my head, started understanding directly. That's when learning becomes something else. Not effort, but instinct. Gloria saw it before I said anything. She always did. One morning, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, watching my hands move as I practiced between sips of coffee. "You couldn't learn Spanish in 20 years, she said, smiling. I shrugged. Didn't need it. She studied me for a second longer, then reached across the table, resting her hand on mine. "You need this," she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded once. That was enough. We didn't talk about it after that. We didn't have to. By year 3, I was fluent enough to belong in a conversation. Not perfect, not native, but comfortable. I could follow at full speed, respond without stopping, understand tone, rhythm, intent. I could exist in that language without feeling like I was borrowing it. And then something happened I didn't expect. I started dreaming in it, hands moving in silence. Conversations without sound, meaning carried entirely through motion. When that happened, I knew I was ready. Not because I had found her. I hadn't. Not yet. But because if I did, I wouldn't stand there helpless. I wouldn't be another person she had to adjust for. I would be someone who had already done the work. And that mattered more than anything else I had done so far. Because this search, it wasn't just about finding her. It was about becoming someone who deserved to be found. Being ready didn't mean being closer. That's something I had to learn the hard way. By the end of those 3 years, I had built something solid inside myself. A skill, a way of communicating, a bridge that could exist between me and her, if I ever found her. But a bridge doesn't matter if you don't know where the other side is. And I didn't, not even a direction. So I started searching for real, not thinking, not preparing. Searching! The first thing I learned was that closed adoption doesn't just mean difficult. It means designed not to be undone. Every system I touched had the same structure underneath it. Layers, barriers, legal walls built carefully over time to ensure that once a child is placed, the past stays where it belongs, sealed, documented, and inaccessible. That word again, sealed. It showed up everywhere. Agency records, sealed. Court documents, sealed. Identities, protected. Information, restricted. It wasn't personal. That almost made it worse, because if it had been personal, there would have been someone to argue with. Instead, I was dealing with a system that didn't care about my reasons, or hers, or anything beyond its own rules. I made calls, a lot of them. Adoption agencies first. The one Henry had used wouldn't speak to me at all. Not even enough to confirm details I already knew. Privacy laws, client confidentiality, legal boundaries, all delivered in polite, practiced voices that sounded sympathetic without actually helping. I kept notes. Every name, every number, every conversation. That's how you build anything. Track the details, even when they don't seem useful yet. Then I hired a private investigator. His name was Garrett. Office on Benson Boulevard, squeezed between a nail salon and a tax preparer. That should have told me something, but I didn't know better then. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't care. I needed movement. He charged me $1,800. 3 months later, he handed me a manila folder. Inside was information I could have found myself. Public records, basic timelines. Nothing that brought me any closer to her. I didn't get angry. Not at him. He had done exactly what the system allowed him to do. That was the problem. I hired a second investigator. Recommended this time. More professional. Better office. More expensive. He lasted 6 months. At the end of it, he sent me an email. Polite. Carefully worded. Closed adoptions in Alaska are extremely difficult to penetrate legally. Extremely difficult. That was the phrase he used. He didn't say impossible, but he meant it. He refunded part of the money. That told me something, too. Even he knew he hadn't given me what I needed. I thanked him, filed everything he had gathered, and kept going, because stopping wasn't an option. Not anymore. I expanded the search, not just through official channels, but through people. That's when I started showing up. Everywhere. The deaf community in South Central Alaska isn't large, but it's connected. Events, gatherings, meetings, places where people came together not because they had to, but because they belonged. I started attending all of them. At first, I stood out. Of course I did. A hearing man in his 60s, showing up alone, signing carefully, sometimes slowly, always respectfully. People noticed, but they were kind. Kinder than I expected. Kinder than I probably deserved, given that I was there looking for something I couldn't fully explain. I went to the annual Deaf Awareness Festival at the Denaina Civic Center. Crowded, loud in its own way. Not through sound, but through movement, expression, energy. Hands everywhere, language everywhere, alive. I remember standing there the first time, watching conversations happen faster than I could follow, laughter moving through groups like current through water, and realizing something that stayed with me long after I left. This wasn't a broken world. It wasn't lacking anything. It was complete. Self-contained. And I had been taught, like most hearing people, that deafness was a limitation. It isn't. It's a difference. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. I attended school showcases, the Alaska School for the Deaf, performances, fundraisers, potlucks, where I sat at tables with people who switched between welcoming me and quietly trying to figure out why I kept coming back. I didn't tell them everything, not at first. Just enough. I'm looking for someone. That was usually where I left it. Some asked more. Most didn't. But they noticed I kept showing up. And that matters. Because consistency builds trust faster than explanations ever could. Over time, I became familiar. Not an outsider exactly, not an insider either. Something in between, a known presence. The older man with big hands who signed a little slower than everyone else, but listened carefully and never treated the language like a novelty. People started talking to me more, sharing stories, asking questions, correcting my signs when I got something wrong, laughing when I misunderstood something in a way that couldn't be ignored. It helped. Not the search, not yet, but me. Because somewhere in the middle of all that, I stopped seeing this as a world I needed to enter for her, and started seeing it as a world she might already belong to. That shifted something. Because it meant I wasn't just preparing for a meeting. I was preparing to understand her life. And understanding matters more than finding. Finding gets you to the door. Understanding lets you stay. Still, there were no leads. Not a single one. Years passed like that. Quietly, relentlessly, every event, every conversation. Every possibility followed until it ended in nothing. No match, no recognition, no one who had seen a girl with glorious eyes and that stubborn chin. I registered with every adoption reunion registry I could find. Alaska's voluntary registry, national databases, online communities filled with people searching for pieces of themselves. I wrote careful messages, not desperate, not demanding, just open. If you know anything, if you've seen, if there's even a chance. Nothing came back. Nothing. That kind of silence does something to a person. It tests you, not your effort, your endurance, because effort is easy when you're getting results. Endurance is what remains when you're not. There were nights I sat in the workshop, staring at the rocking horse I had built that first night, now finished, sanded, sealed, sitting quietly in the corner like a promise that hadn't yet found its purpose. I would look at it and think, she's out there. That didn't change. What changed was everything around it. Time moved. Seasons turned. Anchorage went through winter, spring, summer, and back again, over and over, while I stayed in motion inside a search that had no visible end. Most people would have stopped. At year 1, year 2, year 5. But stopping would have meant accepting something I knew wasn't true. That she didn't matter enough. That the distance was permanent. That what Henry had done was final. I couldn't accept that, so I didn't. I kept going. Even when there was nothing to follow. Even when the silence stretched longer than made sense. Even when the system did exactly what it was built to do. Keep me out. Because somewhere inside all of that, there was still one thing that hadn't changed. A small hand wrapped around my finger, holding on, and until I found where that hand had gone, I wasn't going anywhere. Somewhere between the 3rd year and the 6th, the search stopped being just about finding her. It became about understanding what he had rejected. That shift didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, quietly, the way most important realizations do. At first, I had entered the deaf community with a purpose. Narrow, focused, almost transactional, if I'm being honest. I was there because I thought it might lead me to her. Every event, every conversation, every face I studied carried the same silent question behind it. Have you seen her? But over time, that question changed. Or maybe it didn't change. Maybe it just moved to the background, making room for something else. Because the more I showed up, the more I stayed, the more I listened, the harder it became to hold on to the idea that this was a world defined by loss. It wasn't, not even close. I remember one evening in particular, a community gathering, nothing formal, just people meeting in a rented hall near Midtown, folding tables, coffee that had been sitting too long, kids running between adults who pretended to be annoyed but weren't. I stood near the edge of the room at first, the way I usually did when I wasn't sure where I belonged yet. Watching, learning, hands moved everywhere. Fast, confident, alive. Conversations overlapped without sound, but carried more energy than most rooms I'd ever been in. Laughter came in bursts, silent, but unmistakable. Shoulders shaking, eyes bright, faces open in ways you don't often see in rooms full of hearing people who spend half their time waiting for their turn to speak. Here, no one was waiting. They were communicating, fully. I followed what I could, missed what I couldn't, and slowly, piece by piece, I started to understand something that Henry never even tried to see. This wasn't absence. This was presence. A different language, a different rhythm, but complete, whole enough. I had spent my whole life thinking communication was sound, that words needed to be heard to matter, that silence meant limitation. Standing in that room, I realized how wrong that was, because nothing about it felt limited. If anything, it felt more direct, more honest. You couldn't hide behind tone the same way. You couldn't mumble your way through a sentence or let something sit halfway said. Your hands either carried the meaning or they didn't. There was clarity in that, a kind I hadn't expected, and the more I saw it, the more something inside me began to shift. Not just in how I thought about her, but in how I thought about everything. Henry had looked at his daughter and seen a problem, a limitation, a life that would be harder, narrower, less than what he had imagined. But that wasn't what I was seeing. Not here! Here, I saw people who had built something, a community, a language, a way of being that didn't depend on anyone else's approval to exist. They weren't waiting to be fixed. They weren't asking to be included. They already belonged. That realization stayed with me, followed me home, sat with me in the workshop while I worked. It changed the way I thought about the search, because up until that point, part of me, quiet, buried, had been operating under an assumption I hadn't fully examined, that she might be struggling, that she might be missing something, that she might need saving. That assumption started to fall apart, not all at once, but steadily, because every time I showed up, every time I saw kids signing effortlessly, laughing, arguing, teasing each other with the kind of ease that only comes from belonging, I realized something else. If she was out there, she might be okay. Not just surviving, thriving. And that thought did two things at once. It brought relief, and it brought something sharper. Because if she was okay, then what Henry had done wasn't just wrong. It was unnecessary. That's harder to live with. It's one thing to make a bad decision under pressure. It's another to make a decision that was never needed in the first place. I started seeing it everywhere after that. At the grocery store on Northern Lights, a mother signing to her daughter while they compared cereal boxes. At the bus stop downtown, a group of teenagers moving through conversation so quickly I could barely follow, laughing at something one of them said with a kind of ease that didn't need translation. At the airport once, a man standing alone, signing into a video relay interpreter on his phone, conducting business with the same calm efficiency as anyone speaking out loud. Normal, all of it. Completely normal. The world Henry had imagined, one filled with burden, limitation, difficulty. It existed. Of course it did. Nothing in life is without challenge, but it wasn't the whole picture. Not even close. And the more I saw, the more I understood something. I wish I had known how to say to him that night. You don't decide a life isn't worth living just because it doesn't look like yours. You learn, or you step aside. He hadn't learned. He had stepped aside and left his daughter to build something without him. I kept going to events, kept showing up, and eventually people stopped wondering why. Not because I explained it, because I stayed. There's a difference. Explanations can be doubted. Presence can't. They saw me come back, week after week, month after month. Same face, same hands. Getting better, more fluent, less hesitant. They corrected me when I got things wrong. Taught me things no class ever covered. Slang, context, the way meaning shifts depending on who you're talking to. The way humor works in a language that doesn't rely on sound. I learned to listen differently, Not with my ears, with my eyes, with attention, with patience. That mattered more than anything else, because understanding someone's world, really understanding it, requires more than just learning how to speak their language. It requires letting go of the idea that your way was the default to begin with. That took time, but it happened, and once it did, the search changed again. It stopped being about finding a child who had been taken from me, and became about finding a person who might already have a life, a full one, a good one, a life that didn't need me to fix it, just to be part of it. If she wanted, that last part mattered, because the more I understood, the clearer it became. This wasn't going to be my decision when the time came. It would be hers, whether she met me, whether she spoke to me, whether she wanted anything to do with the man who had spent years searching for her. That choice would belong entirely to her, and I would respect it, no matter what. That was something else Henry never understood. Control isn't the same as responsibility. And love, real love, doesn't demand access. It earns it. I didn't know when I would find her, or if I would, but I knew one thing with certainty by then. If I did, I would meet her in her world, not try to pull her into mine, because her world, the one Henry had walked away from, was not broken, not damaged, not lacking. It was complete. And if she belonged to it, then I needed to be the kind of man who understood why, by the time I understood her world, I was already losing mine. Gloria got sick in the 6th year. There wasn't a dramatic beginning to it, no sudden collapse, no moment where everything stopped and demanded attention. It started the way a lot of serious things do. Quiet, almost polite. A doctor's visit. A follow-up, another test, then a conversation, then a word. Cancer, breast cancer, aggressive. That was the word they used. I remember sitting there in the hospital room, listening to the doctor explain timelines, treatments, probabilities, language that tries to sound controlled, even when it's describing something that isn't. Gloria sat beside me, listening calmly, asking better questions than I was capable of at the time. I didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't pretend I understood everything being said, because I didn't. All I understood was this: something had entered our life that I could not fix, and that was new. For 40 years, if something broke, I knew what to do. Measure it, take it apart, replace what failed, reinforce what mattered, build it back stronger. This didn't work like that. You couldn't cut it out clean. You couldn't plane it smooth. You couldn't replace the damaged piece and pretend the rest of the structure would hold. This was different, and I hated it for that. The treatment started quickly. Hospitals, appointments, schedules that filled up faster than I could process them. Chemotherapy, radiation, words I had heard before, but never had to live inside. Gloria handled it better than I did. That's the truth. She kept her sense of humor longer, kept her patience, kept that steady way of looking at things that made them feel less overwhelming than they actually were. "You look like you're trying to solve a problem," she said once, sitting at the kitchen table with a scarf tied around her head, a cup of coffee in front of her she barely touched. "I am," I said. She smiled. "No, you're not. You're trying to control something that doesn't work like that." I didn't answer, because she was right, and I didn't have a better response than that. The search didn't stop. It couldn't. Even then, even with everything else happening, I still went to events, still made calls, still checked registries, still showed up. Not as often, not as consistently, but enough, because Stopping would have meant something I wasn't willing to accept, and Gloria knew that. She watched me, not closely, not in a way that felt like pressure, just aware, the way she always had been. We didn't talk about Cynthia every day. We didn't need to. She was part of the space between conversations, always there, unspoken, understood. There's a kind of closeness you reach with someone after enough years together, where you don't need to explain the most important things. Gloria and I had that, so when she brought it up, it mattered. It was February, the kind of Anchorage winter that doesn't let up. Snow packed hard along the roads, sky low and grey, light thin and short, like the day is rationing itself. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and flowers that had been sitting too long. She was weaker then. That part was undeniable. The strength was still there, but it had to work harder to show itself. I sat beside her, holding her hand. Same hand I had held for decades. Familiar. Even then, maybe especially then, she looked at me, really looked, and I knew something was coming before she said it. "Promise me something," she said. Her voice was softer than usual, but steady. "What?" I asked. "Don't stop." That was it. No long speech, no explanation, just that. I frowned slightly. "Stop what?" She gave me a look, not annoyed, just patient. "Ron!" That was enough. We both knew what she meant. "I'm not going to stop," I said. She studied my face, like she was measuring something, checking the integrity of it. "I know," she said after a moment. "I just wanted to hear you say it." That landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't doubt. It was certainty. She wasn't asking because she thought I might quit. She was asking because she wanted to anchor it, make it real, spoken, committed. "I won't stop," I said again. This time slower, more deliberate. She nodded, satisfied. Then, because she was still Gloria, even then. "Also," she added, "try not to eat like an idiot after I'm gone." I let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. "Can't promise that," I said. She smiled. Small. "Real. Figures." That was 3 days before she died. It wasn't dramatic. Not the way people expect. No sudden moment. No last-second clarity. Just a gradual quieting, like something slowly stepping back from the world. I was there. Of course I was. Holding her hand, same as always. And when it happened, it wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was still, complete, like the end of something that had been built well and lasted as long as it could. I drove home that night in the dark, snow falling lightly. The Glen Highway stretched out ahead of me, headlights cutting through white that never seemed to fully settle. I talked to her the whole way, out loud, didn't care who might see me or hear me. There was no one there to judge it. And even if there had been, it wouldn't have mattered, because the conversation didn't stop. It still hasn't. Back at the house, everything was exactly the same, and completely different. Her chair, empty. Her mug, still in the cabinet. The silence, different now. Heavier. I went to the workshop. Of course I did. It was the only place that still made sense. The rocking horse sat in the corner, finished, untouched, waiting. I stood there for a long time. Didn't move, didn't pick up a tool, didn't try to fix anything, because for the first time in a long time, there was nothing I could fix, only something I had to carry. And in the middle of that, her voice, not real, not something I could hear, but present, the way it always had been. "Find her, Ron." Simple. Clear. The same as before. I nodded. "Once. I will." And that was it. No hesitation. No reconsidering. because whatever this search had been before, now it was something else. It wasn't just about a granddaughter. It was about a promise. And I had never been the kind of man who broke those. Not in 40 years of work. Not in a lifetime of building things that had to hold. And not now. Not when it mattered most. After Gloria was gone, time didn't stop. That's something people don't tell you properly. They say life goes on. They don't tell you how strange that feels when it does. The same roads, the same grocery store, the same morning light through the same kitchen window. But one chair stays empty, and that absence doesn't fade. It settles, like weight added to everything. The first few months I moved through it without thinking too much. Routine carried me. Coffee in the morning, small jobs here and there, time in the workshop, occasional calls I didn't answer, and underneath all of it, the search, still there, still moving, because I had made a promise, and promises don't wait for grief to finish. If anything, they get sharper, more defined. I went back to it fully by the end of that year, not with urgency, with commitment. There's a difference. Urgency burns fast. Commitment lasts. I expanded everything I had already started. Every registry, every database, every system that might hold even the smallest piece of information about a child placed into adoption 9 years earlier. Alaska's voluntary registry was the first. Paperwork, forms, documentation that required patience just to complete. I filled everything out, carefully, accurately, no shortcuts. Then national registries, online platforms, communities where adoptees, birth families, and people in between left fragments of themselves hoping something might connect. I wrote messages, not emotional, not desperate, clear, direct. A man looking for a child, a grandfather who had not stopped. I posted them, waited, nothing. Weeks passed, months. Sometimes I would get responses, but they were never the right ones. Wrong dates, wrong locations, wrong stories, each one close enough to make you look twice, and then far enough to fall apart under even a little pressure. That kind of hope is dangerous, because it teaches you to expect something every time the phone rings, every time a message comes in, every time something shifts just slightly out of routine. And then, nothing again. After a while, you learn to stop reacting. Not because you don't care, because you do, but because caring too quickly wears you down. So I adjusted. I stopped chasing every possibility like it might be the one. Started treating them like pieces of material. You test them, measure them, and if they don't fit, you set them aside and move on. No emotion wasted, just process. That helped. Not enough to make it easier, but enough to make it sustainable. I attended an adoptee rights conference in Juneau during year 7. That was different. Not a community gathering. Not informal, structured, focused. People there weren't just living with adoption. They were fighting it, or parts of it. Closed records, sealed identities, systems that decided who had the right to know where they came from, and who didn't. I sat in the back, listened, didn't speak much, didn't need to. There were stories in that room that made mine feel simple. People who had spent decades searching. People who had found answers too late. People who had never found them at all. There was anger there, but also something else. Determination. The same kind I understood. Not loud, not dramatic. Just present. Unmoving. That conference didn't give me answers, but it gave me something else. Perspective. I wasn't alone. That mattered more than I expected. Back in Anchorage, I kept showing up. Deaf events, community gatherings, school programs, Anywhere I could reasonably be without turning my presence into something uncomfortable. People knew me by then, not by name always, but by familiarity. The older man with steady hands, the one who listened more than he talked, the one who had been there long enough that his presence no longer required explanation. Some asked me directly eventually, "Who are you looking for?" I would pause, then answer simply, "My granddaughter." That was enough. No one pressed further than that. They didn't need to. There's a kind of respect that exists in communities like that. You don't take more than someone is willing to give. You accept what's offered, and you wait. I waited. Years went by like that. Quiet, consistent, unrewarded on the surface. But something else was happening underneath. Something I didn't fully recognize until later. I was becoming part of something. Not fully. Not the way someone born into it would be. But enough. Enough that when I walked into a room, people nodded. Enough that conversations didn't pause when I approached. Enough that I was no longer being observed. I was being included. That mattered, because it meant that if she was anywhere in that world, I was no longer outside of it. Still, no sign of her. Not once. Not a single confirmed trace. 9 years. 9 full years of searching, learning, showing up, waiting, and nothing to show for it. That's the part that breaks most people. Not failure. Silence. Failure at least tells you something. Silence tells you nothing. And nothing is harder to fight. There were nights in the workshop when the quiet felt heavier than usual, when the rocking horse in the corner, still there, still untouched, felt less like a promise, and more like a question. Was she out there? Was I looking in the wrong places? Was I too late? Those thoughts came. Of course they did. I'm not immune to that kind of thinking. No one is. But they never stayed long, because every time they showed up, something else followed. A memory. Simple. Clear. Her hand wrapped around my finger, holding on. That was real. That had happened. And as long as that was true, everything else was just time. Time I had already decided I was willing to spend. So I kept going, not because I believed I was close, but because I refused to believe it was over. There's a difference, and that difference is what carried me into the 9th year. The year everything finally changed. I didn't know it yet, didn't feel different, didn't look different. It started like every other year had. Quiet, ordinary, unremarkable, until one afternoon, a boy with a bag of chips sat on a workbench that wasn't his and showed me a photograph. By the 9th year, I wasn't expecting anything to change. That's important, because when you stop expecting, you stop reaching too far ahead of yourself. You stay where you are. You do the work in front of you. You don't build hope into every small thing, only to watch it collapse when it turns out to be nothing. I had learned that lesson. So, when someone mentioned the Seaview School for the Deaf needed volunteers, I didn't think of it as an opportunity. I thought of it as somewhere useful to be. They were trying to start an after-school woodworking program. Didn't have anyone to run it. Didn't have tools. Didn't have structure. That part I understood. So I showed up. Monday afternoon. Early March. Snow still packed along the sidewalks. The kind that doesn't melt so much as slowly surrender over time. The building sat in a quiet part of Midtown. Nothing remarkable about it from the outside. Inside, different story. Energy, movement, kids who carried themselves with a kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are in a space that understands you. I signed in at the front desk, explained why I was there, and got pointed toward a room in the back that had been cleared out for the program. Workbenches, some tools, not much else. It would do. I stepped inside, and the first thing I saw was a kid sitting on one of the benches that wasn't his. Feet up, bag of chips in his hand, eating like he had nowhere else to be, and no intention of moving. 14, maybe. Dark hair, Viri. The kind of posture that says, I've already decided how this is going to go. And you're not part of that decision yet. He looked up when I walked in, clocked me in about 2 seconds. That's all it took. Then he signed. You the carpenter. No greeting, no hesitation. Straight to it. I nodded once. Yeah. I set my bag down, took a slow look around the room, then back at him. You the kid eating chips on my workbench. His eyes dropped to his feet, then back to me. A small smile, gone almost immediately, like he didn't want to be caught having it. Your ASL is pretty good, he signed, then added, with just enough edge. For an old guy, I didn't miss a beat. Your manners are pretty bad, I signed back. For any age. That did it. He laughed. Couldn't help it. Tried to cover it with a cough that fooled no one. We understood each other. Right away. His name was Benjamin. He didn't offer it immediately. I had to ask. And even then, he gave it like it wasn't important. Like names didn't matter as much as whether or not you could hold your ground in a conversation. I respected that, because respect, when it comes from someone like him, isn't given. It's tested and passed. We got to work, or tried to. He didn't move at first, just watched, arms crossed now, chips forgotten, studying me, not openly, but enough. That's another thing you learn over time. Some people don't listen to what you say. They watch what you do. Benjamin was that kind of person. So I didn't rush him. Didn't tell him to get off the bench. Didn't try to assert control over the room. I started setting things up. Tools where they belonged. Measuring space. Checking surfaces. Making small adjustments that didn't need explaining, but made everything work better. After about 10 minutes, he slid off the bench. Didn't say anything, just moved closer, watched. Then finally, what are we making? I glanced at him. Something that fits. He frowned slightly. That's not an answer. It is if you're paying attention. That got another reaction. Not a laugh this time. A look. Sharp. Interested. Good. We started simple. Basic cuts. Measurements. Nothing complicated, but enough to see how he worked. And he worked well. That was obvious almost immediately. His hands, they were right for it. Not in the sense that he already knew what he was doing, but in the way they moved. Careful, precise, not rushed. There's a difference between someone who wants to finish something and someone who wants to get it right. Benjamin wanted to get it right. That mattered. We worked for about an hour that first day. Minimal conversation, mostly demonstration, correction, adjustment. At one point, he made a mistake. Nothing serious, but noticeable. He stopped, looked at it, didn't try to hide it, didn't try to move past it, just sat there for a second, then looked at me. Now what? That's where most people wait for instruction. I didn't give him any. What do you think? He frowned, looked back at the piece, studied it. Then, redo it. I nodded. Good answer. He didn't smile, but something in his posture shifted. Small, but real. That was the moment. Not when he laughed, not when he spoke, when he chose to fix something instead of ignore it. That's when I knew we were going to be fine. He stayed late that day, after the other kids had left. Didn't make a big deal about it. Just didn't leave. We worked in silence for a while. Then he started talking. Not directly, not in a straight line. sideways, the way kids do when they don't want to make something sound like a problem. His mum worked 2 jobs, didn't see her much. His dad didn't exist in any way that mattered. He took the bus every day from Mountain View, showed up here because there wasn't anywhere else he needed to be. He said all of that like it was normal, like it didn't deserve attention, like it wasn't worth turning into something heavier than it already was. I didn't push, didn't ask more than he offered, because trust doesn't grow when you pull on it. It grows when you give it space. He started coming back every Monday, then staying late every Monday, then helping set up before I even asked. We worked, talked, argued sometimes. He taught me things too, not just language, slang, the kind Patricia had definitely not covered. Some of it I refused to use, some of it I accidentally used and regretted immediately. He found that hilarious, and for a while, that was all it was. Just a kid, a workshop, something useful being built between 2 people who hadn't planned on needing each other. I didn't tell him why I was really there, didn't tell anyone, because at that point, it still felt like a long shot. Too long to put into words, so I kept it simple. I showed up, he showed up. We worked, and somewhere in the middle of that, without either of us noticing, everything I had been building for 9 years got 1 step closer to meaning something. I just didn't know it yet. That came later, on a Thursday afternoon, with a photograph